Good morning again. Let me go back a couple of minutes. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, I am not Pastor Jim. For those of you who are confused and like, wow, Jim's got a new hairstyle, threw a suit on, it's like a new man. My name is Tom Romnick. Many of you know me. Some of you may know me only by having seen me run around. I'm a man of many hats in the church. I do kind of anything that falls into my lap. And today it happens to be delivering a message. It's kind of ironic because I had a children's message planned, and like any parent, we know that sometimes the kids don't cooperate, which actually fits in really well because it's Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all of our moms, both in the building and outside of it. And one of the things as parents we know is that sometimes we have to adjust. We have to make things up as we go. And it actually will fit in very well with what we're doing today. Before we get into the message, I would like to spend some time before God in prayer. Because I'm not Pastor Jim and because I am a little different, I tend to take prayer requests from the audience because it's good to hear if anybody has any needs or praises. So, really briefly, my daughter may or may not have been exposed to someone who was diagnosed with COVID. She's a typical 15-year-old, so she's at home freaking out, thinking that the world is ending, or thinking she gets out of school. I'm not sure which. But she doesn't realize that even if she's at COVID and stays home, she still has to go to school. The internet is a wonderful thing. When I was a kid, if you were homesick, it meant you were homesick. Nowadays, you just go to school on your computer. So, anybody else? What prayers and praises do we have? Awesome. Oh, May. All righty. All right. So we'll keep the community and coming together. And we're glad you're here, May. As my father used to say, any day on the right side of the grass is a good day, right? So we keep plugging along. We're still here to continue doing God's will. Hopefully we can. All right, well, we'll come together. Word of fair warning, we will end with the Lord's Prayer. You'll hear me start it. Hopefully we all remember it. Because I'm also the projector operator today, so I'm not going to be here to throw it up there, muddle through it. We'll get through it. So let's come together as a community before God to lay our wishes before Him. Heavenly Father, it's been a while since I stood up here. It's me, Tom. You know me. It's a beautiful day. I get to give a message when the sun is shining, the weather is awesome. We don't have to worry about 4 feet of snow out there and how grumpy people are because of that. It's Mother's Day, and as I prepared this, it's awesome that we have these moms who step into our lives. You created a very special role for them. It's a demanding role. It's a role that is vital to who we are and who we become as people. So as we gather together today with all of our moms, we want you to continue to bless them and continue to give them the guidance and the wisdom and the initiative to do all those things that they have to do as mothers. And at least on this one day to hopefully give them an opportunity to get a rest. And even if it's not restful, to at least do things that are different and special to help them realize how much they are loved, both by you and those in their lives. We also want to keep in mind Pastor Jim and his family as they travel out of state for the wedding of a friend. First, we want you to bless that new marriage. Bless the bride and the groom as they start their lives together as a unified couple. And be with Pastor Jim and Lisa and the rest of the family and give them travel mercies. Bring them safely home so they can continue to lead the ministry that you have for this church. We acknowledge as members of a church that sometimes we fall short of those things you would have us do. We fall short in our individual lives. We engage in those acts that are offensive to you. We fail to do those things that are pleasing. And as a community, we struggle sometimes with that ministry that you've laid at Whiting's feet. fail to accomplish the things that you maybe want this church to do, and we struggle with obedience to your will. We just ask that you continue to be with the governing body, with the other leadership of the church, and the membership of the church, and just to continue to light that fire and to help us have the energy and the strength to do those things that you would have us do. Whiting has the ability to be an incredible voice in the community and to provide resources and opportunities for families that maybe they're not seeing right now. So just continue to let us be that beacon for your church in Neenah. And as always, we have those things that we would lay at your feet, those requests, those treaties, or desires and applications that, or supplications that we would have you provide for us. Personally, right now, I think about Miranda and Ava and the rest of the family as they struggle with the impacts of COVID. And we would ask that you be with anyone diagnosed and struggling with the disease right now, to give them the strength and the treatment that they need to recover. And for those who are concerned about it, to give them a sense of peace. As we understand, we are grateful for the vaccines that have been created. Hopefully that will lead us back to a sense of normalcy, whatever normal is these days. We also are thankful, as we said, for our mothers, the ability to gather together as a community and to continue to share fellowship in this building and outside of it as a community of your believers. Just ask that you continue to be with us. And we think of those unmentioned needs. Anytime you ask for prayer requests, we know that there are those where someone says, oh, I don't want to share that, or, oh, it's not worthy, or it's, I'm not going to say anything. So we just want to lay all of those, the things that are on our hearts and the things that are in our minds, you know what they are. We don't have to voice our prayer for you to hear it and to understand it. We just want you to know that all of those things are out there. As always, when we come before you, we acknowledge our sinful nature and that it is only through the death and resurrection of your Son, Jesus, that we have an opportunity to share in fellowship with you, to have direct communion with you. Something that didn't exist prior to that sacrifice, and we are eternally grateful for it. We're thankful for it eternally because we have that opportunity by acknowledging that Christ died for us, by accepting the offering that he provided, and by acknowledging these sins in our lives. We can come before you and worship you for all time. We ask you that you grant all of these things, and we do so, as always, through the name of your Son, Jesus, who taught us to pray, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. All right. As I started getting ready for today's message, when Pastor Jim sometime back said, hey, I've got this wedding I'd like to go to, but we need to make sure we have someone to deliver a message. I was like, oh, that's great. I have this awesome idea that's been bouncing around my head because I've got skating nationals coming up. I'd love to do something on the theology of skating, because I love to tie things together. For those of you who have never seen, I am not someone who spent 10 years studying the Bible and digging in as a course of study in school. What I've done is I've lived in this church for a long time, and I've studied the Bible personally, and my approach is usually trying to find a way to tie my life into theology, something people can relate to, though skating isn't necessarily it. And then someone reminded me it's Mother's Day. And I'm like, yeah, man, hot, sweaty skaters, Mother's Day, I don't see the connection. It doesn't work. So I was like, well, that's okay, because a while back I did a message where I talked about the difference between Mary and Jonah and how they responded to tough situations. And I was like, I think I can continue along that lines. that line and think about our mothers. And I'm going to take a different approach. I told Christy was asking, what's the message about? I was like, it's going to be about the fallibility of moms. And she was like, oh. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's not the fallibility of moms. Maybe it's the things that moms experience in the Bible and how they respond to them. My dad, when I was growing up, I always like to point out that he was not perfect. He was not a perfect man. He was not a perfect father. There were all kinds of times when he did things, I was like, man, I just think that's wrong. And I always said, I was like, I'm not going to do that when I'm a dad. And I'm a dad now, and I let my kids know, hey, you know what? My dad wasn't perfect. He got a lot of things wrong, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. My only goal is, and my effort is to not mess things up the same way my dad did. I want to learn from what he did, learn from the things that I thought he did wrong, and when it comes to the way I handle things, those things I can handle differently, I try to. I'll mess up other things entirely wrong. And I tell my kids, hey, you know what? When you're adults and you're parents, you can do the same thing. I accept the fact that I am imperfect. And oddly enough, moms in the Bible are imperfect too. And I do have a note sitting over there. It's not on here. It was a note. I was talking with one of my skaters this week. I'm going to bring skaters in somehow. I was talking with one of my young skaters this week about the message because, yes, I actually talk about the fact that I'm at church. Sometimes I stand up here. And Audrey was like, well, it's Mother's Day. You should just say Happy Mother's Day and be done. And I was like, I could try that, but I think a 3-second message might go over like a ton of bricks. So I'm not going to do that, but I did want to mention that Audrey thought that maybe you all should have a short message. I did point out to Christy, I am not Pastor Jim, so I'm probably going to have a little bit shorter message just because I have a job. So we're going to talk today about some moms in the Bible and some situations they faced and maybe how that can be taken to heart in what we do. So we're going to look, I'm going to start, my children's message was going to be about the characteristics that we see of a mom. Maybe from a perspective that kids don't necessarily think about. And anytime we're thinking about the characteristics of a wife or a mom, we tend to wind up in Proverbs. And there are some verses, and it's not necessarily, a lot of times I say, everyone remembers this. You all know this verse. This isn't one of them. I think we all know the concepts, but we don't necessarily know exactly where it comes from. And so I was going to talk with the kids about what a mom might look like. And I was going to use things like they're financially sound. They make wise decisions. They maybe have business opportunities to help support the family. They're good managers, right? They manage not only their household, but their personal affairs and the family affairs and the business affairs all very well, right? They have this sense. They're a blessing to their kids. All of these things come from Proverbs 31. And if you read through Proverbs 31, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I had a few comments or a few things that I would talk about, right? How they're a blessing to their husbands and children. They're a blessing to their community because the community will recognize them. And a lot of these things come from the fact that they're doing things at home because the husband was out doing things for work. He was out, and in this one they specifically mentioned that they're at the temple gates. They're at the gates to the city, perhaps teaching, perhaps learning, but they're doing things outside of the house. And that's not maybe the things when we think about a perfect mom. Those aren't necessarily things as kids. No, a perfect mom, let's see, bakes cookies, makes cakes really well, right? Maybe you think about some things. They clean my room because I don't want to, right? But you don't think about some of these things. And as I looked at Proverbs 31, I wanted to talk with the kids about that because then I was going to come back here and I was going to point out, to me, one of the most important verses in Proverbs 31 isn't all of the stuff about what wives and moms look like. That stuff's important. But what really caught my eye when I was looking at verses for this week what caught my eye was verse 1. And it says, the words of King Lemuel, the oracle, which his mother taught him. And that jumped out at me today, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. So this really high bar we have, right? This, if you read Proverbs 31, it sets a pretty impressive set of bars for wives and mothers. And all of those things came from this king's mom. Now understand, kings have moms too, and while the mom may not be the person we read about all the time, they're there. They raised that king. They raised that leader. And King Lemuel's mom was teaching him about what a wife should be, what a mother should be. And she set this really high bar, and I was like, man, why would she do that to herself? Why would she set this awesome high bar? And if you think about it, right, moms out there, what are you hoping for your kids, right? What are you hoping for your sons? That they would find a wife that would be this wife, that would be this mother, that would be this amazing representation of the family. So I thought it was interesting that when we think about what is it biblically that wives and mothers are supposed to be, that we have this high bar that is set by a mom. And I just think that it was really fitting that we would see that. So then as I start to look at other mothers, I went into Matthew, and I went to Matthew 20, verse 22. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is one that maybe we are more familiar with. In Matthew chapter 20, starting in verse 22, we read about Salome going to Jesus, and she has a request of Jesus, right? And she says, the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. The request, Jesus said, what do you wish? And she said, command that in your kingdom these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right and one on your left. So here's a mom again, going out and seeking kind of the best for her kids. She realizes who Jesus is. She knows that Jesus is this prophet and the Messiah. She understands what Jesus is going to be in the future. She wants her sons to be a part of that. Jesus has a very interesting response, though, because here you would think, right, mom looking out for her kids, thinking about what's best, right? We just read in Proverbs about all of these things that moms do. They're a blessing to their children. They're a blessing to the community. And here is Salome thinking about her kids and working with Jesus, and hey, I want them right there at the top levels. Of course, Jesus points out, sitting on the right and left of his seat, one, it's not his call. Okay, Jesus is obedient to God, and that is God's design, God's choice as to where people are seated at this table. But it also means something else, because Jesus said to her, right, you do not know what you are asking. Salome made this request in ignorance of what it meant. Jesus understood that following him and sitting at the same table as him would require going on the same path as him. And Jesus said, are you going to be able to drink the cup that I have to drink from? A cup that we understand, we know when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he repeatedly asked, if you can take this cup away, do it. And here we have James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Their mom is saying, hey, I want them to be right there with you. If Jesus was struggling to drink that cup, how do you think that the sons of Zebedee would have handled it? It was going to be that much more difficult. So a mom, again, looking out for the best interest of her kids, making a request that maybe was out of line and maybe was made without full understanding of what was being requested. Salome wasn't alone, though. If we look in John, and this is one that I know everyone's going to remember, John chapter 2. John chapter 2 is about the wedding feast at Cana. This is one that most of us, right? The wedding feast at Cana, we know it. We've learned that one time and time and time again. Jesus' first miracle, right? And If we look at verses 4 and 5, actually starting in 3, it says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." So mom, again, being a blessing to the community, running out of wine at a wedding in that time frame, that's like one of the ultimate societal faux pas. You had a wedding and you didn't even think about your guests? What kind of people are you? Right? And Mary saw that, and Mary understood that, and Mary didn't want them to have that embarrassment. So she said, "Hey, talk to Jesus." Right? Of course, Jesus looks at her and is like, what does this have to do with us? Right? What are you doing? Because my time hasn't come yet. Jesus understood that it wasn't time for his ministry to start, but his mom, in like true mom fashion, she's like, yeah, whatever. Everyone, just do what Jesus tells you to, and you'll be fine. Right? I think a good way of putting it is she ignored him. Right? She was like, look, I spoke, I'm mom, take care of it. Right? And maybe it wasn't quite that way, but Mary was an important part of the life of Jesus. And we know, what did Jesus do? Mom says do. Jesus is like, what? What are you throwing me under the bus for, right? And she said, do it. And what did Jesus do? He did exactly what his mom told him to do. So Mary was significantly important in the life of Jesus. He was strong enough to rebuke her. Hey, wait a minute. But he was also aware enough of the role of mom and his duties to mom to be obedient to her. Christy and I were discussing before, about Jesus as a child, and I was actually thinking about the same thing yesterday when we drove home from the tree farm. I was like, man, could you imagine being the mother of Jesus? Think about the discussions that must go on, right? Moms are getting together. Man, my kid did this. I try and think back in the time of Jesus. They didn't go to the pinball arcade. It's not that rock and roll music. But, right, moms through all eternity have had problems with their kids, from Adam and Eve all the way to my mom, right? We all have issues with our moms. But now think about being the mother of Jesus, right? You order the kid to go clean his room, already done. You tell the kid, hey, you got to do the dishes, already done, right? I need to go to this, okay, mom. Hey, how are your grades? Top notch, right? You're like, get together with other moms, you're like, yeah, I don't see the problem. Now, Christy pointed out, Jesus, or Mary and Joseph did have other kids, so she got to experience some of that fun. But from a standpoint of Jesus, you're like, yeah, no, my kid's perfect. Right? We all like to think our kids are perfect, but imagine being Mary and like, Jesus. So Mary would have grown up, but Mary was still a mom. Mary still had the opportunity to do things. And while Jesus was perfect, Mary was not. Mary was prone to the same mistakes we all are. And I think none is more important than if we look at Luke chapter 2. I don't even have to look that one up. I'm going to open it up because I have a little piece of paper on it, so it would say, hey, look at it. Luke chapter 2 is kind of near and dear to my heart. Luke 2:52 is what I call my life verse. It is the verse that I apply to everything I try and do, everything I try and be. And it comes at the end of a story we are all quite familiar with, the Jewish feast days in Jerusalem that the families were obligated to go to. Mary and Joseph, of course, went every year, and one year they had quite the adventure, because you'll recall that they went to Jerusalem, the feast days were over, and they started heading home. I always think about the difference in generations and how kids handle things. I look at our kids and I like work with my wife. I'm like, yeah, we got to start cutting the cord. The kids are 15. They're getting up there. They're getting older. You got to cut that cord someday. Let them go out and do stuff. Let them go downtown. Let them, I remember when I was 14, I could just bike from Neenah up to Appleton, wind up in Fremont. My parents, I'd get home. Where were you? I don't know. I was biking. Nowadays, if you thought about letting kids go out biking like that, you're like, okay, I need a GPS transponder on them. Make sure you have your cell phone so I can see where you're at all times, if you're even willing to do that. Well, go back a couple thousand years, and you've got Jesus in Jerusalem, and the family heads out of town. No Jesus. And they didn't just travel like a few minutes down the road. The way my mind thinks, Larry Lemmert, if you happen to be watching, Larry Lemmert one time left his wife at a gas station. But he made it just a short ways down the road, and he was like, where's my wife? And he had to turn around and go back and get her. Kathy Lemmert, mom, as I call her, best friend's mom, she walked out, realized the truck was gone, and just sat down and waited. No cell phones in those days. But that's what Mary and Joseph were dealing with. They traveled literally a full day and then started looking for Jesus. And they're like, where is he? They thought he was with other family members, right? Some of the cousins or other people. It never even clicked in their mind that they had left Jerusalem, didn't have Jesus. And now, of course, now the true motherhood sets in, right? I think nowadays, that really sets in like 3 minutes. Like, where's my kids? I haven't seen my kids in 30 seconds. They're probably burning a house down somewhere, right? Mary and Joseph had traveled a full day. Now that sets in. But they're a full day's travel. They got to go back to Jerusalem. And then they got to find Jesus. If anybody's ever had an opportunity to travel to Jerusalem, it's not Chicago, but it's also not your house. And you got to wander around and try and find it. It took them 3 days to finally find Jesus. And of course, where did they find him? They found him in his house, his father's house, as it would be. They found him, and he looked at him like, "What? Why are you even confused? Don't you understand? This is the only place I would be, in my father's house, learning, listening, learning what's going on. And by the way, not only learning and listening, but teaching. He was there doing what he would do for the rest of his life." Luke 2:52 is important to me because at the end of all of this, it talks about not Mary and Joseph learning, not Mary and Joseph growing, but it talks about Jesus and how he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. He grew mentally, physically, emotionally, socially, religiously. Was developing and growing. I can't imagine traveling that far before I realized my kids are not there with me. Mary managed to do it. It was a different day and age. I don't fault her. She was what she was. But Mary was imperfect. Mary had opportunities to learn and grow herself. Now I'm going to go to the other end of the Bible, because as I was thinking about mothers and what mothers do and who they are, one of the moms that popped into my mind was the mother of Moses. And in Exodus chapter 2, we sort of read that introductory verse about Moses. And how are we introduced to Moses? Well, Moses was born at a time when the pharaohs had become concerned about the Jewish people. It's a good tie-in because we just spent a bunch of time talking about Esther, where what did we have? Oh, we had a country where the Jews had been exiled, and they had continued to grow, and they had continued to populate the country, They had continued to develop as a nation, and the people became afraid of them. Same thing was happening in Egypt. When the time of Moses, right, the pharaohs were getting concerned. Every time we do something to oppress and to keep the Jewish people down, like a baby boom. There's more Jewish people. The Jewish people grow in strength. They grow in numbers. We can't keep them down. And so Pharaoh said, I know a way we can keep them down. We'll just make sure that we kill all the boys. And so he'd ordered midwives to kill the boys, and the midwives wouldn't do it. And he'd ordered everybody to kill it. It wasn't working out. Again, every time you oppress them, they grow stronger. God blesses them, and they continue to grow as a people. Well, the Pharaoh had gotten, kind of more direct about it, and was actually just having people kill the boys. And the mother of Moses, she gave birth. She's like, well, I don't want that happening. She hid the baby for as long as she could. And then we know the rest of the story, right? Put him in a wicker basket, send him across the river, see what happens, right? And it seems odd But when you think about it, as a mother, what would you not do for your children? What would you not do to save their lives? In this case, mom goes so far as to surrender the baby, to give the baby up in the hopes that the baby will survive. And Moses did. Oddly enough, God sees that. God blesses them because, right? What happens? Hey, that's my brother you just found. I'm not going to tell you it's my brother, but hey, you found a baby. I happen to know a nurse mom who can take care of that baby, and boop, Moses winds up back in the care of his mom, but now with the blessings of the Pharaoh's daughter. So he gets to survive in an otherwise dangerous situation. And I thought that was fitting because at the end of the day, every time we get together, every time we look at the Bible, every time that we discuss things, we want to talk about it from a concept of what it means to us and what it means for our lives in eternity. And if we go back into the New Testament, we have Jesus. Mary accepted the word of the angels when they said, hey, you're going to give birth to a son, and he's going to be called Jesus. He's going to be the Messiah, the salvation. He's going to be that ruler and king that you've all been looking for. Maids in that time, Jewish young ladies, always were praying that they would be the one to bring the Messiah into the world. Mary was given that blessing from God to be the mother of Jesus. And I don't think she knew at the time, clearly wouldn't have understood it, because the people expected a warrior king to come. They didn't get a warrior king, they got a sacrificial king. They got that king who would surrender himself for all of his people. And Mary was faced with the challenge as a mom to accept that what her son was going through was what he had to go through. And Mary had the strength to be there on the day that he was sacrificed. Mary had the strength to stand at that cross as Jesus was killed, not understanding necessarily that 3 days later he would come back from the dead, that he would go through the resurrection, and that he would become and come into his own as the Son of God. That's the kind of thing that moms don't necessarily train for. It's the kind of thing that mothers don't necessarily hope for, right? I know that, dark topic, right? But as kids, what's the saying? In times of peace, kids bury their parents. In times of war, parents bury their kids, right? And we say that because we hope that as parents, we would never have to, stand by and watch our kids die. It happens, but it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to get through. Mary had to go through it. She went through it because in the same way that the mother of Moses sacrificed him, surrendered him for his own good, Mary had to surrender Jesus for the good of all eternity, for the good of everybody through all time. It's an ultimate sign of a mother's love that they would acknowledge that their son bears that weight and to stand by him as it occurs. So as we think about our moms and we think about who our moms are and what our moms are meant to be, I don't know if Christy is listening in the nursery, but if she is, it's going to be time to sing in a moment. I will run out really quickly and get her once we get set. But as we think about our moms, we need to think about the blessing that they are. We want to be thankful on this Mother's Day, and we'll pray for that in just a moment. We want to be thankful for our mothers. We want to be thankful for all that our mothers are called to do, because mothers truly do hold that special place. God created a special mission that only mothers can fulfill. Dads can try all they want, but we just can't do it. We got to have the moms too. So I hope that at least speaks to you a little bit. It was an interesting study as I started trying to get ready for today. I do want to end in prayer because we do want to bless our mothers. I think Christy will have some things to say on that as well. But please join me in prayer as we wrap up today's message. Heavenly Father, as a flawed person, I know that sometimes I can hit, sometimes I can miss. I hope that today's message gives us something to think about. I spoke to somebody out there and gave each person something to consider and ponder, perhaps dig deeper and study your word more closely. As we look at our moms today, Mother's Day, and recognition, it's the one day that we pay the attention that we should probably always pay to our mothers. We want to be cognizant of that mission, cognizant of the blessings that the mothers in our lives are on all of us. It doesn't have to be our birth mom. I think everybody here knows that the moms will step in. I have had a multitude of mothers in my life who make sure that they try and keep me on the narrow track. We want to just we want you to bless them this day and always for all of the things they do, and continue to have them be a blessing in our lives. In your name we pray. Amen.